proposing to recommend to the commission for approval. You can read those at your own leisure. Those are the safety targets. You can also see on page 8 the table of the pavement and bridge condition performance measure targets. This time we're setting both 2-year and 4-year targets. So the 2-year targets to be expected in the year 2019, as well as the 4-year targets in 2021. These are the measures for pavement and bridge condition. You can read those at your leisure as well on page 8. And finally, if you draw your attention to page 11, these are the targets for system performance, freight, and congestion mitigation, air quality. Again, 2-year and 4-year targets that we can expect to see in 2019 as well as 2021. And those are the targets in the table. Feel free to read those at your leisure if you haven't already. The action that we're requesting today is recommendation for the commission approval, which will be this Thursday, November 15th. I will entertain any questions if there are any.
Yes, on page 5, your safety performance measures. And never in my life have I seen safety performance measures loosening. What is this about?
Well, okay, so this is a very data-driven process that has been going on at the state level. INDOT has been leading a process of analyzing the safety trends with other metropolitan planning organizations, including NERC at the table. We've been looking at 5-year rolling average targets, or data, and so we've been seeing the number of fatalities actually slightly increasing, which is why, to be realistic, to achieve those targets, we've seen a slight increase that we're projecting, as well as for the fatality rate and for the number of serious injuries. However, we are seeing declines, as you can see, in the serious injury rate as well as the number of non-motorized fatalities and injuries. So it just depends on what the data is suggesting. And again, that analytical process has been going on at the state level between INDOT and other metropolitan planning organizations.
So you're saying that the goals are being relaxed because we're not going to meet the safety goals?
Right. This is kind of a policy level that the state has taken in saying that we want to be realistic with what the data are suggesting and with what the trends are going. So
our goal is to be less safe so that we don't miss a number.
Not necessarily a goal. A target is different than a target is a measure of where we project to be at, not necessarily where we want to be at, but it's where we want to project.
The performance target is not a goal?
No.
So
No, they're different.
they're different.
Yeah.
Well, we had discussion about this several months ago. I was very concerned. Our goal is to have no deaths, no accidents, no property damage. But unfortunately, that's not realistic. Target is something that they're working with the state Fed on.
Thank you.
If it helps, I agree with you. But here we are. Any other questions or comments for Scott?
Mr. Chairman, I would just mention that the Surface Transportation Committee reviewed these performance measures and that made recommendation that this be approved by the TBC.
How does this TBC feel? Do I have a motion to forward this with favorable recommendation?
So moved.
Second.
We have a first and a second. Any other comment? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those against?
No,
One against.
I don't want to be one of the 75 additional people that targeted to die.
Truly understand. Moving on, that's moved for favorable recommendation. Thank you, Scott. Item 3.3 is coordinated transit plan. That's on page 12. James Winters will present. The coordinated transit plan is a federal requirement in order to receive funding for federal program 5310, enhanced mobility of seniors and individuals with disability. This federally funded program provides resources for eligible transit operators to improve mobility for people who are or who have disabilities, people who are elderly, and people who are low income.
All right, thank you very much. The coordinated transit plan is something that the Transit Operators Roundtable, and this, first I'd like to speak through the public comment report, and you can find that on pages 12 through pages 23 of your packet. There are a few copies of the coordinated transit plan that are available. They're on the front table, but it's about 50 pages, and this document is already pretty heavy, so we didn't print one off for everybody. So on page 12, you can see that we had, I believe, about 5. The most significant public comment that we've received was from David Wright of GPC, who makes the document starting on page 15 through pages 19 or 20. So that most of those comments was a summary of what we had discussed in our previous Transit Operator Roundtable meeting, along with some additional language that GPC wanted to include. We expanded some references to GPC's rapid bus service. We moved NICD's transit profile into its own section as a multi-county provider. We enhanced language about local match. We enhanced language about the core services of GBDC and how they're related to local match. We removed the map, and we changed some language and some other transit profiles, and then we added an implementation matrix that's in the back of the document. Are there any questions about the public comment report? There are also 2 letters that you can find in the back of the public comment report, and you can see my response to those as well, but they did not require any significant changes to the document.
We have no comments on the public comment. And we move on to resolution 1822, pages 24 to 91. Do we have any comments or questions on that? Sir?
Just real quickly, going back to the maps actually. The service map on page 8 of the coordinated plan, that one is pretty accurate. It shows current conditions in terms of fixed route transit. The maps on pages 37 to 39, however, don't. I'm not sure if it was an older map layer fixed route used, but it's clearly obvious that, you know, a chunk of Maryville is currently served by fixed route transit. It's not shown. So obviously it was, you know, page 8 was after Broadway service was introduced, but 37, 39 were before. So before the final publication, is it possible to make that correction?
I believe so. So we did have, as you know, our GIS planner quit halfway through the planning process of this document, so some of those changes have been a little challenging, but that would not change any contextual parts of the document, and it would not change any of the plan goals or funding priorities, so it should be fine to update that before it goes to its final version on the website.
Great. And is there any way possible to just provide a paragraph that introduces the matrix that's at the appendix, because it's just out there and there really isn't any context to it? I mean, we know what it is because we talked about it in the round table, but there's no explanation as to what exactly it is.
We can look into it, although I would say that the previous 2 sections have context that lead into the matrix. If you look at it as a standalone chapter, I can see that the context could be missing, but if you look at it as a whole
Do
document.
they refer to the matrix? Was the language added to actually refer to that appendix?
I believe so, but we can talk about that. That wouldn't change any of the context of the document.
Other than that, I really appreciate your
Sure.
fluidity and making some adjustments.
Thank you.
Do we have a recommendation from this body?
Second.
And a second from David. Any other discussion? Comments? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody against? Next, we have the presentation on draft funding allocations and program rules. And that will be presented by Ms. Carolyn. This involves the notice of funding availability, and this is on pages 92, etc. The resolution is actually on 18 to 22.
Good morning. Good morning. All right.
So today we will go over the funding targets regarding the next call for projects. Got both James and Charles at the ready to present their parts of the presentation, so it's kind of a tag team affair this morning. And this is pretty much the final step before we move forward to the commission. We have done quite a bit of work already, as you all well know. Most of the people in this room are part of a topical committee and have been very integral in making sure that we have been able to take care of this over the last several months regarding the process. So there'll be a little bit of review here, but primarily we're going to be talking about the funding targets themselves. So getting into that, an overview, and I believe the entire presentation has been folded in your pack in ledger format or legal format, so you should be able to keep up. The progress made so far, we've been able to identify all eligible types for federal funding, and that is complete. We've been able to categorize project types in the programs and identify eligible funding sources. We've completed that. We've been able to evaluate project types for impact to the visions and goals and for critical paths. We've been able to based on impact evaluation, we've been able to group these projects into 3 major tiers. And then that has been completed. And then finally, today we'll be dealing with assigning the funding available to the highest tiered project types. Now today's action will involve recommend the NOFA, and for those who have acronym issues, that is Notice of Funding Availability. The term comes up quite a bit in the presentation. First of all, we'll be talking about the TIP development goals, 2020 to 2024. Then the highway and transit programming rules for the Chicago and Michigan City UZA. These are 2 separate urbanized zones that we deal with here at NERC. And then funding targets for the 13 programs that have been identified. Funding source assignments for each project type, and then the process to reallocate funding to other program project types if not enough applications are received. Scoring criteria that is unique to each program, timeline for this and future NOFAs. And going forward now, let's talk about the TIP development goals and how we got here. First of all, we were to propose proposed enhanced programming rules for the following. To avoid future issues with our TIP deficits due in part to projects failing to advance to project letting. Again, these are common issues that we deal with here at NERC with our project sponsors. To ensure consistency with state and federal programming requirements and better ensure no FWHA funds lapse back to NDOT or transit funds to the FTA. We've had quite a bit of that happen over the years, and we're trying to stop that type of leak in our program, so to speak, and establish a region-wide playbook for PE, right-of-way, construction funding, and to ensure all sponsors are treated the same when, if they need amendments due to the project development delays. Okay? Now, the second, of course, and to increase transparency to the sponsors and to the public, of course. Now, we're also aiming here to leverage all federal aid available to Northwest Indiana by providing for the first time a full view on all available fund sources to all project sponsors in the same NOFA, about $267 million in all throughout the entire program. And we are looking to program highway and transit projects in both Chicago and Michigan City UZAs at the same time. And finally, under this goal here, develop a process that will be placed on a routine timeline, which is predictable and more transparent to sponsors and public, replacing the previous periodic NOFAs that were funding and UZA based, and that never fully programmed all federal funds available to our region. So definitely we're trying to get more efficiency out of our programming cycle, So better linked with regional priorities, a programming approach that evaluates all federal aid eligible projects for their impact on the vision for the region and 2050 critical path to achieve that vision. A project evaluation approach with defined evaluation criteria that is framed around 9 umbrella criteria that relate to the vision for the region. And I'll be talking about momentarily, and then a performance-based planning focus. So these are the overriding development goals behind the new programming approach by NERC. And now we're going to get into the actual programming rules in detail. And for that, I will bring up Charles.
Good morning. Looking at the programming rules for the highway side or the surface transportation side. Went over several of them, and I believe I've shared these with just about everyone. The sponsor, as we can read, so I'll just kind of go over some of these general ones. We are going to request that the sponsor provide a guarantee that their match will be available for each phase in the year that it's programmed. And sponsors, again, will be encouraged to identify all funding sources. This may include innovative financing, so which everybody, I think, is pushing for more innovative financing. The sponsor must have a current EDA transition and Title VI plan on file with NERC. I believe everyone generally does. A complete streets policy and guidelines should be followed whenever and wherever possible. If it can't be met, then a reasonable explanation must be given. PE and right-of-way phases will be limited to a combined total of 7.5% of the estimated construction estimate. We were looking in between 10 and 7.5 and 10, and to get the biggest bang of a buck, we looked at limiting at 7.5%. We're going to initially set these funds aside, and if no funds are needed, then we will roll those into the project. The PE phase must start within the fiscal year that is programmed. This also is true with the right-of-way. Now, the PE may be paid entirely by the sponsor or with federal funds, and funds with matching funds. If right-of-way is required, it must be encumbered in the fiscal year that is programmed. The application must include a map of sufficient scale to identify the project. The project must let in the fiscal year that is programmed. If it can't, it will be moved out to a mutual benefit year, agreed upon year between NERC and the project. The problem we have is that we are fiscally constrained to a year. So projects, if they move out a year, then that following year, I'll have a deficit, and in the current year, then we have a surplus. So I've got to figure out how to swap those projects around. If a project is allowed to move within the 5 year, then if the project is allowed to move and it still cannot be made within that 5-year tip, the project will be eliminated from the tip, losing all commitment from NERC. The future work must wait until the next NOFA, and then the project will be required to compete for the future funding. So, moving on, number 9, the project will not be allowed to change the scope in such a way that it appears to be an entirely different project. We had a lot of discussion over this earlier this year, and this is what we came upon and the decision that we came. What we want to do is just get away from you're competing for a project, and that's what you're competing for, and if you change the scope, then you're essentially cheating. You could allow to downsize the scope or phasing of the project. Phasing, so you can fit that in there. If a project is applying for federal funds from CMAQ or HSIP, additional eligibility must be met. During construction, change orders will be limited to 10% of the construction letting amount or $100,000, whichever is less. That is currently the policy that T-Rock has, so it's nothing new. Transfers of funds from FHWA derived sources to be flexed or FTA will be requested in NERC and will follow all rules, NDOT rules. A risk factor will be assigned to each fiscal year to assist in absorbing the unexpected project cost increases or uncertainties. So, for instance, the first year of the TIP, there's 0% risk factors. The second year, there'll be a 1%. Third year is 1.5%, fourth year is 2%, and the fifth year is 2.5%. This is going to be for any unexpected unknowns that may come up and that we may need extra funds for, whether it's real estate or you put your shovel in the ground and you hit a lust or something like that. Moving on to be the program rules for transit, and that is James's territory. Yes.
Is there any questions on the roadway stuff at this point?
No.
All right, thank you. The programming rules for transit, this came from kind of a few different places. I just wanted to talk to you first. So we've been in contact with FDA, and they've given us some good guidance on how we are to be expected to use federal funds in the future. Many of these rules were also taken directly from the Transit Asset Management Plan for the NERC subrecipients, which came before this committee last month, and other best practices from around the country. So, just some programming rules. Transit vehicles. All these rules are in relation to transit vehicles. If an operator has more than one vehicle that's met the end of its useful life, they may swap the priorities of the vehicles if the vehicle swap has a lower rate of condition assessment. So what this is saying is, it's a really complex way of saying that when we prioritize vehicles, we're prioritizing them based on age of the vehicle and mileage, primarily. But if an operator has two vehicles that are up for replacement, but we only have enough funds to replace one of them, if the other vehicle is assessed in worse condition, that operator may choose to have those vehicles swapped. And then the vehicle that's in better condition will be replaced in the following year. NERC will not submit any vehicle replacement to a grant unless it's confirmed that the vehicle meets the end of its useful life in the following calendar year. This is because it slows down grants and bogs down the procurement process when we have a vehicle that's due for replacement in a grant that shouldn't be there. Preliminary specifications of vehicle replacement and capital purchases are due before FDA grant submissions and or TIP applications. That's before we confirm a project, we'd like to know what kind of vehicle we're looking at, so we don't get into a situation where we've approved a project for replacement, but that vehicle doesn't actually meet the needs of the service. NERC will not program any vehicle replacement for a subrecipient into the TIP unless it's part of the Indiana State PPA or an identified state cooperative agreement. Because of the new rules in the federal government and just procure a vehicle unless it's part of a larger purchase agreement. That's because we'd have to go out and inspect the factory and make sure that all the parts are being produced in the United States, and that's not something that Lisa Todd can do. She can't go and visit all the factories in the United States for that. NERC will not submit any vehicles into early replacement FDA if the vehicle systems are not inoperable. So we have to have some sort of measure that the vehicle is in bad condition before we try and retire it early. Operators will have to submit annual condition assessment, the new requirement of the transit asset management plan. Vehicles will only be replaced until the cap of 5307 funding designated for vehicle replacements. Vehicles may be purchased beyond the cap if it allows small transit providers to meet the goals set in their TAM plan.
James?
Yep.
Could you explain, 1H again?
1H.
The one you just said.
So, there is a cap for how much funding we're gonna spend on vehicle replacements. And it's saying that we're not gonna go above that cap. Unless it's specifically related to meeting the threshold requirements outlined in the TAM plan.
For small transit providers?
Well, yes, that's because right now, we're only the small transit providers in Northwestern Indiana have an active TAM plan, other than NICD.
So what you're saying is only the human service providers can go beyond the cap?
Who defines as a small
No, it would be, once you have a TAM plan, I think you would also meet that criteria.
Okay. Right, so that's kind of redundant.
I think that we could probably pull the small out of there.
Yeah, because it
Sure.
sounded like you're talking about only human service providers.
Okay, we can do that. Late payments and data submissions may result in denial of programming for federal funds. And so that means if an operator, this is kind of, the feds mostly are responsible for this, but if you're late or not submitting to the National Transit Database, or if you are not submitting to the annual list of obligated projects, or these reports are for subrecipients only. You know, if something happens where these reports aren't being generated, then it may result in not programming federal funds for projects. Funding that's programmed in the TIP that is not obligated in an FDA-approved grant 2 years after the original programming year will be made available in the following NOFA: recompeted and reprogrammed to avoid lapsing funds. This is a solution that has been recommended by FDA, that if you are submitting a project into the TIP, and for any reason, by the programming year, you are not able to actually obligate that project, then we have 2 years until NERC is going to say, okay, well, we're gonna take those funds and put them back into the pot so that they don't lapse. So what we'll do is, you know, that, let's say we had a project in 2010, and by the end of 2012, that project still isn't obligated, we'll rewrite the split letter, put those funds back in the pot so that we can spend them down in 2013 at the top of the pile, so that way no funds go back to the federal government. If an operator does not have enough local match to replace multiple vehicles in a single year, the operator may choose to bump a vehicle from 1 year to another, advancing priority of all other replacements. So with the TAM plan, we have a list of vehicles that are going to be replaced in a single year. But if an operator runs out of local match, so say if you had 5 vehicle replacements in a year, and you can only afford to replace 4, we'll just bump one in the following year, and then you can replace it then. Pursuant to FDA regulations, operators may not receive operating assistance funds valued in excess of the proportional share of vehicle revenue hours as a percentage of a maximum of 75% of a single year's total 5307 apportionment. This is a really complicated way of saying that FDA has restrictions on how much of the 5307 apportionment can be spent on a single operator's operating costs. This is something that we haven't paid a lot of attention to, but it's important. It's identified in Table 3A, and according to the actual statute that guides that document, this is how it's written. So we're going to be paying closer attention to that, and we'll be working with operators to make sure that we don't exceed that cap set by Congress. Operators seeking FHWA CMAQ funds to pilot new transit service understand that the funds are for startup service, and it's the responsibility of the operator to secure future operating funds to sustain the transit service. So just, you know, we want to make sure that if we are funding a new startup with CMAQ funding, that there's a plan to make sure that that new service will have enough local match to sustain the gains made in that in the provisional period. Operators are expected to spend down obligated carryover in grants and unobligated carryover not yet in a grant before requesting new funds from the most recent apportionment. The carryover balance equal to half of a year's worth of operating expenses will be maintained regionally for stopgap funding purposes should the federal portion be unexpectedly reduced. What we're seeing is that sometimes an operator may request additional funds for a New Year's worth of some kind of service. So, for instance, if an operator receives annually $10,000 for preventative maintenance, but they're only spending $5,000 in preventative maintenance a year, what we're saying is we're going to look at the funds that are still in a grant. We're going to expect that those grant funds be spent all the way down before we write a new grant. Likewise, if we have written in a split letter in 2017 that 30% of 5307 funds or something like that goes to one operator, before we write a new split letter in 2018 that says that we're going to give that operator more funds, it's expected that they first spend down that old money. Because what we're seeing is that in northwestern Indiana, not so much in LaPorte County, but in Lake and Porter counties, we have a significant balance of carryover that we need to spend down. Because without spending it down, it makes it really difficult for us to go back and fight with the RTA to get more funds, and it also makes it really difficult for us to continually manage money and shift money around so that funds don't lapse, and that's getting harder and harder. We have to spend down that carryover. If an operator has reduced or eliminated service in one part of their service area and has applied for an expansion in another part of their service area, the operator may be asked to provide a demonstration of how the saved revenue from a reduced service has been redistributed to the rest of their service area. Additionally, an operator may be asked to include documentation on how the new expansion will differ than the service that may be cut. This is something that came out of our individual program criteria conversation that we had a couple weeks ago. Because an issue that we've seen in the region is sometimes we have an expansion in one part of the service area while also cutting in another part of the service area. So what we want to make sure is that all parts of the transit service area are being maintained and that we're not continually expanding service and then cutting in other parts. Like, we just want to see that those funds are being used across the board. Yes?
How do I know we stripped that?
I'm sorry.
We stripped that, we talked about that for a while, we agreed that because of the complication of needing to deal with different parts of the service area and spend our money wisely, fixed route operators, we could discuss that, but we're not gonna make that a requirement, we were gonna strip that from the,
If I could call back to that meeting, the two directions that we agreed on was that, one, that the place where that wasn't in program scoring, that it wasn't going to be contingent on getting funds for a program. So, like, if there was a service cut, it wasn't fair to the operator to not score